Perfect. All right. Well, like I said, thank you for joining me today. Just kind of a reminder, today's really supposed to be kind of just an informal chat, just kind of getting to know you and helping students who are coming into VCU get to kind of learn, kind of like we were just talking about, what it takes to be successful in your courses, recommendations you have, ways to kind of form that relationship between faculty and student that sometimes it's very hard to make that connection right away.
Sure.
So the first question I always like to ask is, what got you into, one, math as a subject of your passion, and then two, what got you into teaching?
So what got me into math, it's actually funny. A few years ago when we were it's actually when we were moving and we were, cleaning out old boxes of stuff. My wife found a box of stuff that my mom had kept from when I was in first grade. And we had to do this assignment where we had to write something we're good at and something we're bad at and something we like, and then what we want to be when we grow up. And apparently in first grade, I already knew, because I wrote that I want to be a mathematician when I grow up. So that, from a very young age, was just something I was always interested in. I always liked math. So that part was easy. The teaching part, that came much, much later. So I graduated from Virginia Tech with my bachelor's in 2009. So remember, 2008 was the big recession. So it was only a year later. The economy still wasn't that great. So I figured, all right, I'll just kind of hide out in grad school for a while. And it turns out that in math, especially, almost everyone who goes to grad school ends up being a teaching assistant, and most of them end up teaching their own class at some point. That's extremely common in math. So through that experience, I just kind of stumbled into the realization that I really enjoyed teaching.
Very cool. That's so interesting, because I was going through college myself during the recession, and it's always interesting to hear how that particular time affected decisions in terms of staying in school, going back to school, trying something different that you wouldn't have expected.
Right.
So kind of then based off of that, I know that when you're teaching a lot of these more intro level math classes, you get students from just a very wide variety of disciplines, some of whom already had a passion for math, some of whom math is just, trying to get to that next step, if they're pre-med or, going into some other direction. What do you recommend for students to really get an interest in your course, to really kind of get ingrained in being successful in studying for it?
So there's a lot of people have what we call math anxiety, where, and it varies person to person, right? Where this began, right? So me personally, right, when I was a kid, I liked math. So this was never an issue that I personally experienced, but I've seen it all the time. So at some point in their past, they had a bad experience with math, probably in school. So maybe in, I don't know, sixth grade, right? They had maybe a teacher they really didn't like, and they just really didn't like their math class, and they kind of just carried that forward. And I think this is particularly common in math because that's the subject where, now this happens in every subject, of course, but it happens the most in math, where if you have a bad year and you don't pick up some concepts you were supposed to pick up, it hurts you moving forward more so than it would in other subjects. So it kind of snowballs. And that's why this math anxiety that so many people have, I think, is as common as it is. Because if you have a bad year and you don't like your history teacher, well, it was just a bad year, right? That doesn't mean that your next year you are weaker in your history class necessarily, right? Maybe a little bit, but not the way it happens in math. So I think just kind of acknowledging that is one of the biggest steps that you can take if this is something that you suffer from. is just kind of think back and say, okay, I haven't really enjoyed my math classes. Why is that? Is it because I just had this one bad experience that just kind of set me back, and then that's been snowballing ever since? Because if that's the case, then you can kind of do a reset and say, well, I've been on this track of I'm always behind, I'm always behind. Well, maybe now's your opportunity to say, okay, let me reset, acknowledge where I am, and make sure that I get into the right course, prepared and ready to work at the level that I need to be at. So we get a lot of students who they try to place into as high a level of a course as they can,
Yeah.
which is not always the best idea, right? Because let's say you place into calculus, but you really don't have the pre-calculus skills that you need. Well, what's going to happen, right? You're going to take your calculus class. You're probably not going to do well because you're not actually ready for it. You withdraw, maybe fail. Then you're either try repeating it, maybe withdraw again, or you drop down to pre-calculus where you should have been all along, right? You wasted a semester, you wasted the money, right? So that's one of the big issues that we see is we see people trying to get placed into a higher level than they really should be at. So, and I think those two things go hand in hand, right? It's the desire to just get it over with.
Yeah.
And because math has not been an enjoyable subject, right? So they're like, oh, more math, let me just get it over with.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work out that way, right? You got to actually pass the classes. And I think the best way to do that is to kind of do a reset and say, all right, let's take this opportunity to say, where should I really be? What is the appropriate level for me? So when you're doing that placement test, don't look anything up, right? Just do it at your ability and see where you get placed, and just take it for what it says and just go into that class.
Sure. So it's interesting that you mentioned, that for math in particular, having that placement test, that you do get that wide variety of students where some are truly ready for it, but then you also get those that from a VCU standpoint, from an official standpoint, they're ready because they passed the test, but they may not be quite ready when they're actually in the class. So given that you do get kind of this large variety of preparedness, especially when we think about, I know that depending on what zip code you might be in Virginia, you might have had a different level of math education. What are the resources or the tips or the strategies for students to be successful in your class that you've seen that really work, so that they can catch up to the level they need to be at, or if they're already at that level, they can really make the most of their time in your class?
So there's a couple things. So in terms of resources available, all the lower level math classes, so whether it's math 141 or 151, or there's actually a new one, I think it's math 129 is brand new.
Yeah.
Those are all going to have TA support. So there's going to be TAs available either in the class, or if not there, in the Math Help Center.
Okay.
So that's always available. So if you feel like you're falling behind, if you need that extra help, you can always seek out your TAs, either your class TA or at the Math Help Center. In terms of strategies and the way you want to approach the class, the biggest thing is to make sure you don't fall behind, because the same comments about how it snowballs from year to year, that applies within a class as well, right? Because if you say you have a busy week and you never get to your math homework, well, that homework was what was going to prepare you for next week.
Yeah.
And so now if you didn't understand last week's topic and that leads into next week's topic, you're going to go to class next week and you're not really going to be able to follow it. And now you're in that snowballing situation again where you're behind and it's hard to catch up. And so again, with math in particular, it's so easy to have that one slip up and now you're behind and now it's so much harder to get caught up. So you really got to be, if you have to fall behind in something, you probably shouldn't let it be your math class, because it's probably easier to catch up in one of your other classes than this one.
So given that, and just remembering my own journey and some of my fellow students, it's very frequent that students fall behind that first month, especially as we're welcoming some new students, who may just not have the study skills that they need to be successful in your course. What can they do once they've realized what they now need to change? What can they do to try to catch up? Obviously, like you said, it's much harder to do so, but if they want to do that, what would that take them?
You kind of have to make it part of your routine. Like, the best way to work on math in particular is, even if your homework is assigned, say, weekly, you shouldn't do it all in one big chunk at one time during the week, right? And I don't even just mean procrastinating. Like, even if you do it early, you still shouldn't do it all at once, right? It's for learning, it's better to spread it out. So the best thing to do is to try to block out certain times during the week that are designated. This is the time that I'm going to work on my math homework.
Okay.
And say, print out your schedule that has all your classes and when you're going to eat and when you're going to work out or whatever.
Yep.
And just have that as being, all right, this is this hour of Monday and Wednesday and Friday, right? These hours of the week, that's designated for math homework. Because again, just the nature of math is it requires a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And I don't like to use the word study for math, because there's really very little studying involved, right? I use the word practice because that's really what it is, right? That's why we call them exercises, right? It's literally the same idea as going to the gym and exercising. It's that repetitive practice of the motion in the case of physical exercise, but it's the same idea. It's just a mental exercise instead. So you need to do it regularly and multiple times during the week, right? It's the exact same idea.
That's a really interesting analogy. I never thought of it like that, but looking back, that would make complete sense, that it's just mental exercising. Whereas, when you are studying, you're trying to memorize, maybe do a little bit of application, whereas math is strictly application based.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I think that's great advice. I wish I'd learned that when I was a younger age. So then, kind of picking up on a different note from one of your previous answers, you mentioned working with TAs. I know students, when they come in, they a lot of times aren't sure what kind of relationships they're going to form with professors, how that looks. You think about being a professor and you're teaching a very large class or a class that's online, and students don't know where their community really is. Do you encourage students to talk to you? Do you really prefer that they meet with the TAs to kind of form those relationships? What does that dynamic look like for you, and then for students to try to get to know either you or the TA?
So it depends on the class. So for me specifically, if it's calculus, which is math 200, then the classes aren't that big. The classes they usually have around 30 students.
Okay.
So, and those classes, they don't have designated TAs. There's still the Math Help Center, but in my calculus class, it's just me and then 30 students. So there, of course, I have a chance to actually get to know everyone who's there. And so I'm going to try to I'm going to try to have relationships with them individually. In pre-calculus, which is Math 151, and it depends on the semester. Usually in the fall, we have more people than in the spring. So in the fall, I might have 120 students in my class. So in that case, it's not realistic for me to really get to know all 120, right? So there it's probably, and it depends on what you need, right? So if you want to have like a set weekly time where you're going to come every week for extra help, like if you feel like you know in advance,
Mm.
I'm going to need to be coming in every week for some extra help. Like some people just know, right? They come in, they're like, I know this is going to be a tough class for me. I know I'm going to need the extra help. Let me just set this up in my schedule every week from
Yeah.
the outset, which is a great idea. Then it really doesn't matter. You can pick one of my office hours, set it up with me, pick one of the TA's office hours, set it up with them, pick a math help center hour, find someone you like there, set it up with them. Any of those things can work.
Sure.
Otherwise though, if it just depends on the nature of your question, right?
Sure.
So if it's a math related question, then I mean, that's what the TAs are for, right? You can ask me or you can ask them.
Yeah.
If it's a like course related question, well, those are going to come to me. And that's a big reason why I don't really have the bandwidth for those relationships that I'd like to have, is that with 120 students, I get so many questions just about course administration and stuff like that, that takes up most of the time that I have to answer those, that I don't really have the time to be more personal in those big classes. I wish I did, but it's just not realistic.
Sure. Yeah, no, I can get that, because I know a lot of students, they struggle sometimes with even knowing like what's a good enough question to come to you to ask. Especially, whether it be math related or non-math related. So sometimes it's for them just knowing what kind of like the barrier is of should I come in or should I email or should I just go to my TA? So that's always helpful to kind of hear that. So then kind of going off of that though, too, with students who are enjoying your class, they're doing well. I know, when we start talking about maybe our math majors, maybe our pre-health students, they're starting to think about, maybe I want to get a letter of recommendation for an internship, scholarship, something. How do you recommend that they form that level of a relationship with you where you would feel comfortable writing a letter of recommendation? Is that something that you would do, or is that something where you think there are other disciplines? How does that work for you?
So I've definitely written plenty of recommendation letters before. Usually it's from people who are in smaller classes, although I have occasionally done it for people in pre-calculus.
Mm-hmm.
What you need to do though, so if you're someone who's in that position, like a pre-med student in pre-calculus, and you're anticipating needing recommendation letters, then you can't just be like an anonymous person, right? Like, because there's going to be 120 students.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a list of 120 names on my roster, right? And sure, and because I've had to decline some people who had like A's, but I never spoke to them because they never needed help, right? So they never came to me for help because they didn't need it. So yeah, I can see that they did great, that they got an A, but what am I going to put in a letter? They got an A. Well, they already know that. They have your transcript, right? So there's nothing for me to put because I don't know the person. So for the people who I have been able to write letters for in these big classes, there are people who sit near, so that whatever the style of classroom is, they sit near the front.
Mm-hmm.
And they just talk to me. Like, it doesn't have to be even about math. They just, in the 3 minutes before, while we're waiting for class to start, right? They are just talking, not even necessarily to me, but they're just there, they're visible, they're a recognizable person,
Mm-hmm.
rather than just being face, in the sea of 100 people, right?
Yeah.
That it that's one way that you can be someone who I recognize and say, oh, I know you, and yeah, you do great in the class, but I also know about you beyond your grade that
Mhm.
you're getting.
Yeah, that's always great because it's something that I've heard just consistently with every single faculty member. It's always been, you know, to get a letter of rec more than just talk to me about the class. Like it's okay to just get to know me personally, even if it's just a couple minutes in class, just to see that you're more than just a student, that I'm more than just a professor. It's always been really refreshing that everybody feels the same way, that you need to show me more than just that you're a smart student, that you're a great student.
Mhm.
Um, so great. The last question I always like to ask is, how would you like your students to perceive you going into a class, having you as their professor?
So the biggest thing, and I'll start this with an anecdote that I'll bet almost every teacher has experienced, is, and it's funny that when you go to the grocery store or wherever, right, just some regular place in town,
Mm.
and a student sees you, and they kind of get weird about it, like I live at the school or something. Like, just realize that I'm just a person, just like everyone else, right? I have my life with my interests. I go to the grocery store, I get food, right? And so that, for many people, and I don't think anyone does this deliberately, right? It's just when the relationship is purely, professor student, right? Then it's easy to view the professor purely as the professor,
Mhm.
which is why when you see that person in the grocery store, you're like, whoa, what's he doing here, right?
Yeah.
But now, obviously, if that person thought about it for 5 seconds, they'd be like, oh, of course they're here, right? Why wouldn't they be here? But it's better if you're viewing, and this can go both ways, right? You can have professors who have this, awkwardness with their students, right? But it's better if that relationship is not so, like, business-like,
Mhm.
because this isn't this isn't like a transaction, right? Where we need to have a more collaborative relationship, because I'm trying to help you learn things, and so I need your feedback about, what do you understand, what don't you understand, right? There needs to be a back and forth,
Yeah.
and that's easier if we're viewing each other as just ordinary people, right? So I think that is the number one thing, is just try to view all your professors as just ordinary people. And so keep in mind that whatever happens, right, things can go wrong, right? If they said they were going to have your test graded on this day and then they don't, it's probably because, I don't know, something, they got a flat tire and had to deal with that instead, right?
Yeah.
Stuff happens. So just always keep in the back of your mind that, they're a regular person with a whole life outside of the job, just like you are, right? You're a regular person with a whole life outside of being a student. So keep that in mind, and the relationship can be a lot stronger and a lot more valuable if you do.
Great. Well, thank you for answering all my questions and for joining me today for the Science Hub Coffee Chat.
Yeah, of course.